The balanced scorecard methodology is one of the simplest yet most powerful ways to make the vision and mission of an organization actionable. The balanced scorecard provides the framework for an organization to move from deciding to live their strategy to actually doing it. The scorecard describes the strategy, breaking it down into its component parts through the objectives and measures chosen in each of 4 different perspectives. Traditionally, businesses have used descriptive financial measurements as indicators of whether or not they are doing well. We rely on measures like return on capital employed or return on investment, profit, market share, earnings growth, stock price. Unfortunately, this hasn't led to resounding success. Business measurements must also be carefully managed to make sure that they give the right answers and that the right questions are being asked. Non-financial measurements help assess, report, and drive success beyond short-term financial reporting. Now, according to the annual Business Balance Scorecard survey, 95% of a typical workforce does not understand their firm's strategy. Furthermore, 90% of organizations fail to execute their strategy successfully. And finally, 54% of respondents cite poor vertical alignment when it comes to the initiatives and objectives that drive strategy. So really what this means is that firms need to move beyond traditional management control systems for a number of reasons. These systems typically focus on measuring lagging indicators. They do not consider requirements of today's organizations or the business environments that firms operate in. They encourage short-term thinking, are only part of the picture, and promote a traditional view of cost allocation. And finally, as indicated by the surveys on the previous screen, they're meaningless to a large part of the organization. So welcome to the Balanced Scorecard approach. In 1992, Drs. David Norton and Robert Kaplan started a working group to examine the challenges faced by businesses reporting only on financial measures. Over 1 year, the duo worked with 12 companies to devise a balanced scorecard, or a set of measures that give top managers a fast but comprehensive view of the business. Now, the initial thinking on the balanced scorecard concept was presented in an article in the first issue of the 1992 Harvard Business Review. This seminal work is part of your reading for this course. Now, before you start giving me a hard time for referencing a model developed 30 years ago, I'll note that many management tools we use today are actually older than this. SWOT, Porter's 5 Forces, Value Chain, the Diamond of National Advantage, all thanks to Michael Porter. Over the years, the balanced scorecard has remained relevant. The readings for this week are a snapshot of the evolution of Kaplan and Norton's original model. Most recently, a focus on the triple bottom line as a business imperative has led to the reimagining of the balanced scorecard for a new era. When it comes to the balanced scorecard, Kaplan and Norton argued that what you measure is what you get. So if you're only going to measure financial numbers, then every action in your organization is going to be focused around driving that. And there are some inherent issues with that. So they argued that financial management systems are actually inadequate for today's modern business success, and that no single measure can provide a clear performance target. And finally, that focus must be on both financial and strategic metrics. The reason this approach is termed balance is because it addresses the challenges of traditional management systems, which prioritize short-term gains but do not adequately balance the need for long-term profitability. They focus on lagging indicators that measure what has happened versus what is likely to happen, and are focused on finances versus strategy. So again, thinking about the balanced scorecard approach, we end up with a number of metrics that are longer term in nature. They are leading versus lagging, and they are strategic rather than merely financial. Now, financial measures are good, but they do present a key challenge, especially when you're only using financial measures because those measures are what are known as lagging indicators. So using lagging indicators to determine strategy is akin to looking in the rearview mirror when driving. I think we can agree that that isn't going to get you where you're going. A firm's leadership is responsible to its stakeholders. Increasing this group expands beyond the shareholders and the board of directors to include customers, employees, suppliers, and other communities. So in order to answer to this group, leaders need to ask two important questions. How did we perform this past month, quarter, and year? How are we going to do next month, quarter, and year? So in order to answer those two broad questions, you need a management system that is able to look both directions through the use of leading and lagging indicators. So yes, you're going to be looking in your rear view, but you're also going to be looking out your front window. So think of the balance scorecard as the dials and indicators on an airplane cockpit. Pilots need information on fuel, airspeed, altitude, bearing, destination, and other indicators that summarize the current and predicted environment. If they only relied on one instrument, there is little chance they'll arrive at their destination. The balance scorecard is the closest management tool to a crystal ball as you will find. So just some stats on the use of balanced scorecard. 80% of organizations using balanced scorecard reported improvements in operating performance. 66% of these organizations reported an increase in profits. 95% of a typical workforce does not understand its organization's strategy. And 90% of organizations fail to execute their strategies successfully. So 86% of executive teams spend less than 1 hour per month discussing strategy, which is actually terrifying. And 70% of organizations do not link middle management incentives to strategy, while 60% of organizations do not link strategy to budgeting. So you can see that there is some evidence that balanced scorecard has a practical application in today's business, and that there is a desperate need for improvements in strategy across different organizations. So business leaders need to learn how to look at their businesses differently. As Leonardo da Vinci eloquently said, realize that everything is connected to everything else. So think about how organizations are structured and operate. You can see that by focusing on traditional financial outcomes, we miss the opportunity to measure and manage everything that contributes to our success. So those who succeed know that financial measures or outcomes are just really the tip of the iceberg. How organizations succeed depends on meeting the needs of their customers through combining tangible and intangible assets through their business processes. For those firms who have decided to use a balanced scorecard approach for their strategy, there are really 5 main reasons. The first is to execute the strategic plan through the alignment of the company's efforts and decisions with strategy. Business Scorecard also allows for the communication of strategy across the organization, such as with strategy maps. It also enables you to track strategic performance, typically via reports, scorecards, and dashboards, and allows for the alignment of the organization's divisions and departments around a common strategy, and finally enables individuals to link to strategy, showing how they contribute to the organization's goals. The balanced scorecard is simple, but not simplistic. There are generally 4 perspectives, and while you will sometimes see different descriptive names for each of the different perspectives, generally speaking, they're covered by these themes. So, first is the outcome objectives perspective or the financial objective perspective. And this requires that we ask, to succeed, how should we look to our shareholders? Next, we have our customer perspective. And this asks, to succeed, how should we look to our customers? What needs do we need to meet? Third, we have our internal process perspective, which asks, to satisfy our shareholders and customers, in what business processes should we excel? And finally, and this is the perspective that you'll most commonly seen named differently, is our enablers objective perspective. And so sometimes you will see this named organizational capacity, sometimes learning and growth, but this is really about, what do you have? What are the assets and resources that you have? And the perspective asks, to succeed with our vision, how shall we sustain our capacity to innovate, learn, and grow? What are those things that we have that we can capitalize on? So the balance scorecard starts with asking the right questions, because without the right questions, we cannot gather the right data, which means that we cannot measure the right things. Developing a balanced scorecard is both an art and a science. As the coherent organization of key performance indicators, many firms struggle to create a list of objectives and measures that is appropriate. The goal is to identify those we must continually evaluate to ensure that we are driving our strategy forward. Too few metrics or KPIs, and you may miss some important measures that are key to contributing to achieving the firm's vision. But again, having too many metrics or KPIs, you're likely to be overwhelmed and not paying appropriate attention to what is going to drive your business forward. So if the balance scorecard is such a great tool for enabling strategy within organizations, why don't more firms do it? Well, there are some things that you need to watch out for and that make this strategic tool a bit complicated. So first is that it is time consuming to develop, and especially given the pace of the world that we live in, many senior leaders don't appropriately put time aside in order to put the work in to develop a balanced scorecard. It also requires senior leadership involvement. And as you can imagine, especially coming out of pandemic times, and as we're evolving to a new world normal, time is scarce. Sponsorship also needs to be ongoing. There needs to be a commitment to a cultural shift within the organization in order for balanced scorecarding to work. Now, despite the challenges, the balanced scorecard is a valuable tool as it plays dual roles. It is both a translator of strategy and a performance communicator. So ultimately, the goal of strategy maps and the development, implementation, and use of balanced scorecard and operational dashboards is to move from those in the organization really having no clue about what they're doing every day that contributes to the success of the firm, to having a shared vision, being able to act on a plan for success, and understanding whether or not the goals have been accomplished. So according to a study by Cranfield University, more than 50% of large organizations use some kind of balanced scorecard. And of these organizations, 77% report that their balanced scorecard is extremely or very useful. 75% use the balanced scorecard to influence their business actions. 61% had less than 500 employees, while 9% had over 10,000 employees. And just to give you an idea of what some balanced scorecards might look like, I've included some samples for your review. Now, there is no doubt that the world that we live in is increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and that businesses are struggling to realize success. Now, having a vision is one thing, but business strategy is really key to enabling a firm's success. As Patrick Dixon said, business strategy is the battle plan for a better future. Tools like the Balanced Scorecard enable firms to proactively use systems that rely on more than traditional management control systems in order to operate in this VUCA world that we live in.